Once upon a time, a long time ago, there was a world filled with countries ruled by kings and queens. People in these countries lived their lives, sometimes happy and sometimes not, but they didn't always get along. This story is about a time when things got really bad and the whole world changed. In 1914, something terrible happened. A young prince from a place called Austria-Hungary got shot in a faraway city called Sarajevo. It was like a domino falling because this event set off a chain reaction. Austria-Hungary blamed another country called Serbia for the prince's death. Soon, other countries got involved. It's a bit like when a small argument between friends grows and more friends join in to take sides. Austria-Hungary had friends too, like Germany. Serbia had friends like Russia and France. These countries joined the argument, and it became a big, scary fight. That's how World War I started. Soldiers from all these countries had to go to war. They left their homes and families to go fight in far-off lands. They lived in trenches, which were like long, muddy ditches. Life in the trenches was tough. It was cold, wet, and the food was terrible. Diseases spread, and many soldiers got sick. The fighting went on and on for 4 long years, from 1914 to 1918. During this time, many people lost their lives. Families were torn apart, and there was so much sadness in the world. Finally, in 1918, everyone decided they'd had enough of the fighting. They wanted peace. They signed a paper called the Treaty of Versailles. This treaty said that the war was over and blamed one side, Germany, for starting it. It also made Germany pay a lot of money for all the damage the war had caused. But even though the war was over, the world had changed. Some countries became stronger, while others became weaker. The world map was redrawn, and new countries were born. And the pain of the war lingered in the hearts of those who survived. This big, sad fight, called World War I, taught the world some important lessons. It showed how destructive wars could be, and how important it was to find ways to settle disagreements without fighting. People hoped that this would be the last big war, but sadly, another one, World War II, came later. In the end, World War I was a story of how countries argued, and it turned into a terrible fight. It changed the world and reminded everyone that peace and cooperation among nations were very, very important. As the war raged on, many countries joined in. Some nations, like the United Kingdom and Belgium, got involved because they had treaties to protect smaller countries. It was a bit like when a big brother steps in to help a little brother who's in trouble. The fighting wasn't just happening in Europe. It spread to different parts of the world. Battles occurred in places as far apart as Africa and the Middle East. It was like a really big game of tug-of-war, but with countries and armies instead of ropes. One of the most famous parts of World War I was the use of new, powerful weapons. It was the first time that things like tanks, machine guns, and chemical gas were used in battle. These weapons made the war even more deadly and frightening. As the war went on, both sides wanted to gain an advantage. They tried to come up with new strategies to outsmart each other. Sometimes these plans worked, but often they led to more suffering and loss. The people back home were also affected. Families worried about their loved ones who were away at war. There was sadness in many households as they received news of soldiers who wouldn't be coming back. People had to make do with less food and supplies because many resources were going to the war effort. And then, in 1917, something significant happened. The United States, which had been staying out of the war, decided to join in. They wanted to help make the world safer and bring an end to the fighting. Their involvement gave new hope to the countries fighting against Germany and its allies. Finally, in 1918, the fighting came to a stop. Everyone was tired, and there had been so much loss. The leaders of these countries got together and signed the Treaty of Versailles. This treaty was like an agreement to end the war and try to prevent such a terrible thing from happening again. But while the war was over, its effects lingered. Many countries were left with a lot of damage, both physically and emotionally. The world was changed forever, and people were determined to avoid such a devastating conflict in the future. In the years that followed, people worked to build organizations like the League of Nations, which aimed to promote peace and prevent future wars. They hoped that the world had learned from the suffering of World War I and that it would be the last time such a terrible war would happen. So, World War I was a story of countries arguing, turning to war, and experiencing immense suffering. But it also became a story of hope as people tried to learn from the past and build a more peaceful world. It was a turning point in history, shaping the course of the 20th century and beyond. During World War I, many battles took place. One of the most famous battles was the Battle of the Somme, where soldiers from the United Kingdom and France faced German forces. It was a long and brutal battle with heavy casualties on both sides. The war also saw the emergence of new technologies and tactics. Airplanes were used for the first time in war. Pilots became like knights of the sky, flying their fragile planes and engaging in dogfights. These aerial battles added a new dimension to warfare. In the seas, there was another kind of battle happening. Countries had powerful navies, and they fought to control the waters. The sinking of the British ocean liner RMS Lusitania by a German submarine in 1915 shocked the world and played a role in the United States' decision to enter the war. Life on the home front was tough. People had to make do with less because many resources were being sent to the soldiers. There were rationing programs where families could only buy limited amounts of certain foods and goods. Women played a big role in supporting the war effort by working in factories and offices. The war also had a huge impact on art and literature. Many writers and artists expressed their feelings about the war through their work. It led to the creation of powerful poems, paintings, and stories that captured the pain and loss of those times. As the war dragged on, both sides were looking for ways to end it. They were tired of the fighting and the loss of life. Finally, in 1918, an armistice was signed. This was like a promise to stop fighting. On the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour, the guns fell silent. The war was over, but the world had changed. Countries were left with a lot of damage. Cities were in ruins, and people were trying to rebuild their lives. Families mourned the loss of loved ones, and the scars of war remained. The Treaty of Versailles, which officially ended the war, had some harsh terms for Germany. They had to take responsibility for starting the war and pay a lot of money as reparations. This created a lot of bitterness and economic hardship in Germany, setting the stage for future conflicts. But even in the midst of this suffering, people hoped for a better world. The League of Nations was formed, a precursor to the United Nations, to promote peace and cooperation among nations. People wanted to learn from the horrors of World War I and prevent such a catastrophe from happening again. So, World War I was a story of battles, new technologies, and the sacrifices made by people at home and on the front lines. It was a time of pain and loss, but also a time of hope, as the world sought ways to build a more peaceful future. This war shaped the course of history and left lasting lessons for generations to come. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe our channel. Until next time.